This conference is brought to you by CodeStack, React and React Native development experts.
Hey everyone, I'm very happy and excited to speak at the React Native Europe conference. So today we'll talk about React Query with GraphQL CodeGen and Typescript. Let's start with a few words about me. My name is Arnaud and I am an entrepreneur and CTO. I'm also passionate about developer experience and solving complex problems. React Query. So React Query is quite popular now. It's a powerful solution to fetch and cache remote data. And the library has been created by Tanner Linsley and is also famous for React table or React chart components. The library is now maintained by Dominic, and you can find on his blog a lot of very interesting articles about React Query and Typescript. We'll also use GraphQL Code Generator. It's a simple CLI that you will use to generate your TypeScript types and operations from your GraphQL schema. This CLI has been created by the Guild. The Guild is a group of open source developers. They have a lot of other solutions for GraphQL. And the GraphQL Code Generator itself is provided with a lot of plugins for popular languages and libraries. So let's have a look at the technical stack for this demonstration. So for the React Native app, we will use Expo, Typescript, the GraphQL Code Generator with GraphQL config, React Query with GraphQL request, and React Native paper, and also Suspense and Error boundaries. For the API, we'll use Azure with the Postgres database, and everything will be hosted with nhost, which is a great backend as service solution. So this technical stack is very close to what we did for our own React Native app in production. So we will be able to share some recipes and some code with you today about how to use React Query with Code Generator and TypeScript. So let's have a look to the agenda. So we will review and look at the different features and the code in this React Native app. So here you can see the topics that we will cover today. And we'll conclude with a comparison with other popular libraries as Apollo clients. And I will share with you the lessons we have learned during this project. So let's start with the Stale-While-Revalidate concept to see how it works. To demonstrate the Stale-While-Revalidate concept, I will use Azure to edit the data in the database. Azure will expose my data as a GraphQL API that is consumed by this very simple React Native application I have created especially for this talk. So when you click on one movie, we fetch the data about the movie details here. So what we want to offer as a user experience is when you go back to this movie details, you want to use the cache at the client side. So you will have an instant response experience. And in the meantime, you expect that your React Native app will fetch fresh data from the server. So this is actually what it is happening now. But my connection is too fast that if I change the data on the server, you can see that it's displayed instantly because I have a very high-speed connection. So now I have to slow down the connection to illustrate the Stale-While-Revalidate concept. So I'm using the network link conditioner, which is a great solution to experience different connection speed. you can download this tool with the Xcode additional tools. So first, let's change a value of this movie title and the ratings. And I just save the data, and now I can slow down my network connection and click on the movie details. And you can see that we have one very few seconds just to display the cache data, and he has just the time to revalidate the data from the server. So let's do it again. And now let's use a very bad connection. So you can see that we are still displaying the same data that are in the cache. And if I change the connection quality to H, for example, we will have the data updated. So this is exactly what you expect in a modern app, is to have instant response from the cache, and in the background refetch the data from the server. So jQuery has this very good default, is Stale-While-Revalidate concept, and it's very useful because you will have a snappy experience while optimizing the data fetching behind the scene. So let's see now how it works and how to generate the corresponding code with GraphQL code generator. To use the GraphQL code generator, you have to install the CLI first. Next, you have to configure the code generator. To do that, I will use GraphQL config that will allow me to also use the VS Code GraphQL extension. So you can use the same configuration file for both the GraphQL code generator and the VS Code extension. So to configure your GraphQL code generator, you have to define a schema endpoint here. You can add some optional headers. You can define where your queries and mutations are defined, and where you want to generate your TypeScript types, and with which plugins. Like here we want to use TypeScript, and we want to generate hooks by using jQuery, and jQuery is using as a fetcher GraphQL request. And that's it. You can now move on your queries and mutations definition. So let's create a new one. And here I'm using again the VS Code GraphQL extension. So I have autocomplete. So now I can just browse my API schema here, and I can just select the fields and the queries I want to use, and I can even execute a query. So it's really great to have this possibility to create very easily and quickly your queries and mutation in this GraphQL file, and have a preview of the data. So if we have a look at a more detailed example here that we will use in our demo application, you can see that you can define some movie fragments that you can use in your queries and your mutation. And you can also define your GraphQL variables, and you can also define some mutation. So everything is defined in these GraphQL files. You can have one, you can have multiple files. It depends on how large is our application and how you want to structure your queries and mutations. So the next step is to generate the corresponding types and hooks. To do that, I will use the terminal, and I will use my new generate command. And this command is just using GraphQL code gen by using the config file I've just defined. So it's quite easy and it's very fast. Here it generates all the types and all the hooks in 2 seconds. So let's have a look to the generated file. So here you have a very large file with all the types and hooks generated from the GraphQL API schema. So here you can look at the movies type, and if we go at the bottom, we will find our hooks that are using the requery hooks and the fetcher. So you don't have to take care of this file. It will be automatically maintained and generated by GraphQL CodeGen when you need to. So I mean that you don't have to manually edit or add types to this file. You just have to regenerate your this file when your schema has changed or when you have added some new queries or mutation in your GraphQL file. So as you can see, GraphQL Code Generator, it's a productivity booster. You can just focus on using your requery hooks instead of having to create first all the types and all the queries and hooks somewhere. It will be done automatically by GraphQL CodeGen. So the next step will be to see how to use these generated hooks and type in our components. So here we are in our app component. So as a standard React Native application, we have to define some providers. And here we have to define one provider for the GraphQL client and another one for the query client. The GraphQL client provider is a custom one that we just use the GraphQL request client, and where you just have to define your GraphQL API endpoint. And maybe for your app in production, you have to define some authorization headers. The next provider you need is to use the existing query client provider. It's a provider that is available with React Query. And you have to set your query client. So here, our query client is a new query client from React Query. And what is really great with React Query is that you can define some global settings for all of your queries. So here we have just defined that we want to use suspense, and we don't want to have multiple retries when an error occurs. It's just for the demo purpose, but maybe the default is 3, but you can just adjust this setting according to your needs. And you have a lot of multiple settings that you can define globally for all of your queries and mutation. So that's it for the main app file. You just have to define these 2 providers. Next, you have to actually use the hooks generated by the GraphQL Code Generator in your components. So let's have a look to the movies list components. So here I have my movies list component, and this list is using a custom hook to fetch all the movies from the API. So if I go inside this custom hook, in this custom hook, I'm using the GraphQL client that requery needs, and I use the generated hooks generated by GraphQL CodeGen, and that's it. So it's nice because here I have a very nice encapsulated hook, and my component code is very lean. And here I can just add some additional configuration and logic, and I don't have to implement this hook. It's already generated by GraphQL CodeGen. So in this example, the first parameter is a fetcher. So in our case, we want to use GraphQL client. And after you have some variables. So here, this is the query variables I have defined in my GraphQL file. So here I have also, for example, the offset. This is one available variable I have defined in my GraphQL file. So it's very easy. Just have to consume the hooks generated by the GraphQL code generator and use the generator. And then you get this query info result, but you can, if you want, use all the possible query info fields you need here, like is fetching, is error, is success, and so on. But in this case, we just want to return to our component the data. So this is the movies. Again, thanks to GraphQL code generator and types in Typescript, I have automatically these nice types. And I want just to expose also to my components a refetch method that is exposed by React query, use query. And I can now, in my movies list component, I can use the movies data. And if I need to refetch the list, I can use this function in my component to refetch the data. So this is basically how you can use React query and the hooks generated by the code generator to have a very clean and encapsulated solution in your components. Okay, so we have just seen how to use GraphQL code generator and the generated hooks into our components. And now let's have a look to the other features that React query provides to us. So first, let's have a look at the initial data. So if we go back to our very simple app, here we have this list of data, and so this list just fetch some data from our GraphQL API, like the ID, the title, and the ratings. But so it's just this simple set of information. And when we click on one movie, we want to display instantly the information we already have in our list and display this information while loading extra details about the movie. Okay, so again, if I click here, it's already in the cache, so it's instant. If I go here, I have instantly the title and the ratings, and I want to load the details information when the screen is displayed. So to do that, maybe the nice way to use React query to do that is to use initial data. So if we look at our movies list component, when you click on one item, we use React navigation to navigate to the movie detail screen, and we send as a parameter, as a root parameter, we send the movie, the actual item in the list. So when I click here, I just navigate to the screen and send the movie data I have as a parameter. So I have the ID, the title, and the ratings, and I want to display instantly this information. So to do that, if I go to the movie details screen component, so I have this hook. It's a custom hook I use movie details, and the parameter is movie. A movie is a movie fragment, and if we have a look to the fragment here, it's only the ID, the details, and the ratings. But the movie details fragment is more. It's the storyline, the genre, and the ratings. So what I need here is I need the details, but I want to display instantly the information I have. So to do that, I can go into my custom hook, and here I'm using the generated hook generated automatically by GraphQL code gen, and I have a variable which is the movie ID, and I have this great initial data React query property. So I can say that just use this initial data for this query, and it means that it will be automatically used by my component to display some information without waiting to have the whole details coming from the API. So it's a great way to manage this case, because your movie detail used as a single source of truth. This is the rec query. You don't have to have an extra movie list item information somewhere. You just have to rely on the same movie details information here. So this is how you can use initial data to have this kind of very optimized solution, because here you can have a GraphQL query with only the data you need for the screen, and you don't have to fetch everything. So I know that with GraphQL you can do that, and it's nice in a lot of cases. But if you have a huge list, or if you have a lot of details to fetch, it's better maybe to optimize your list data to fetch only what you need to display, and to display and to load the details when needed. But you can instantly display what you have in your list. What also you can do with rec query is you can prefetch. So on some events, you can even prefetch some data if you anticipate that the user will display another screen, and so you can preload some data. So that's it for the initial data. But again, it's very nice to have a single source of truth in your components and to optimize how the data are fetched and displayed. Let's now have a look at the automatic refetch options rec query provide, and let's start with the on-app focus refetch. So here I am in the app component, and I have added also some logs about when data are fetched from the server. So on the left you have my actual device, and you can see that when I manually refetch my list, you can see the logs at the same time. So what I want is when the application goes to the background and goes back to the foreground, I have this automatic refetch. So you can see that it's already done here automatically, and it's working also for the detail screen. Okay, so when the application is going back to the foreground, automatically rec query will refetch all the active queries. I think it's a great behavior, because the users don't have to refetch manually when they go back to a screen. It just automatically performed by rec query. So how to implement that? It's quite easy. It's not easy as the web in a web application, because this is a default with a React web application. With the React Native application, you have to use this hook that will use app state, which is a React Native hook that will use this on app state change function. And when it means that when the React Native app state change, it will call automatically this function, and this function will tell to React Native that the app is focused, and when the application is active. You don't want to do a refetch when the application is not active. You want to do a refetch when the application is active, and that's it. And you know that all of your rec query active queries will be refetched when the application goes back to the foreground. So I think it's great. You don't have to code everything in your component and in your code to manage this case. You just have to add this very simple function and use the focus manager to tell rec query that he has to refetch on focus. For the next feature, I won't be able to demonstrate it, but I'm going to show you how to implement this solution. Is when the network is offline and when you go back to online mode, you want to automatically refetch the data. So let's see how you have to implement this solution. So one way to do that is to create a new custom hook. And this hook will just use React Query Online Manager to set the network status. And to know the network status, you have to use a netinfo object from a React Native community netinfo. So it's very easy. You just have to implement and to call this hook in your app component. And when the device is offline and when the device is going back online and you are on your app, automatically all the queries will be refetched. So again, it's a very nice UX because with mobile you can have these issues with the connection. So you know that if a user has your application open and when it's going back offline from offline to online mode, he will have his data automatically refetched. The next refetch options we are going to see is OnScreen Focus and polling. OnScreen Focus is when you want to refetch, for example, the movies list when you display the screen. So right now you can see that this is actually what we do. When you go to a detail screen and we go back to the screen, we refetch data. But again, this is Stale-While-Revalidate feature. I mean that when you go back to the list, React Query will use a cache first and in the background refetch the data from the server. But to have this automatic refetch on screen focus, we have to implement it. So to do that, in the movies list component, I'm using a new custom hook. And this hook is quite simple. It's using use focus effect from React Navigation, and it will just initiate a refetch, a React Query refetch when we display again a second time the screen. So it will be not done when the screen is displayed the first time. It will be refetched only when we're going back to the screen. So this is a very simple solution to implement this on refresh focus with the React Query. And the refetch function here is a parameter of this use refetch on focus hook, and is coming from the use query React Query hook that has this refetch function. So pretty straightforward. You just have to use it where you need to have this automatic refetch when a user is going back to one of your screen. The last automatic refetch options we are going to see is polling. Polling is when you want to automatically refetch your list, in this example the movies list, at a specified interval. So it's very easy to do. You just have to edit your React query options. So here I'm using my custom hooks, use movies, and I just have to set the refetch interval option in my use query hook. So let's say I want a refresh every 2 seconds. You can see in the terminal that automatically this query will be refetched every 2 seconds. You can set this option for a specific query, as we do now, or globally in the new query client options. So it's great when you want to have this automatic refetch. It can be complementary to push notifications or GraphQL subscriptions. It's good to know that you can use this option. Just take care of the energy consumption, and if it's really relevant, if the user stays on the same app and the same screen for a long time. So it's up to you to decide if you have to use this refetch interval option. So just to conclude about all of these automatic refetch options, I think that React Query provides maybe 80% of your need in terms of automatic refetch, and is quite well integrated with React Native and easy to implement. So I think React Query, one very strong point is that is so easy to have these very good defaults and what you can have and what you can expect from a modern React Native application. Now we can explore mutations, and we can see how to invalidate cache and to do optimistic updates with the React Query. So in our movie details component here, we can do some mutation about the movie ratings here. What we want to do is to have an instant feedback. So I mean that when you click here on the star, you want to update the UI instantly without waiting for a response from the server. So this is optimistic updates. What you want to do also is when a mutation has succeeded, you want to refetch automatically the list information to have a consistent information here according to the mutation you have just done in the detail screen. So how to manage cache invalidation and optimistic update in my code. So what we have done here is we have this custom hook that returns a function that you will call when a user click on a star here. So this function will accept the movie ID and the new ratings. If we look deeper into this hook code, you can see that we have this function definition here that we return, and this function just manage the new ratings, and we'll call this mutate in sync function that is a React Query function that you use to call your GraphQL API, and you send this by using these variables. So this is where the mutation actually happen. We have another hook where you have to define your mutation that you use here. So this hook will use the hook generated by GraphQL CodeGen according to the schema and your GraphQL file. So here it will create a new mutation according to the different options you have defined. You have the onMutate option, onSuccess, and onError. You have also onSettle option, but I don't use onSettle here. In onMutate, what I want to do first is to cancel ongoing fetching. I don't want to have ongoing fetching if I do a mutation. I need to get the previous movie details because I want to do an optimistic update, so I want to alter the current data, and also need this previous movie details data if I have to roll back if an error occurs later. Here, this is actually where we do the optimistic update. So where you are using a query client from React Query with the setQueryData function. So I say that I want to update my query data for this query, and I want to use this variable. So this is the movie ID, and I want to update the data. So I want to change the ratings here with the new ratings. So this is how to do optimistic update with React Query. And if the mutation succeeds, I just have to invalidate the queries I want. So in my case, when I change a rating here, I want to update the list. And you can see again, if I click on the star, look at the terminal, it will automatically initiate a cache invalidation of the movies list. So I'm sure that if the user go back to this screen, it will try to have fresh data consistent with my mutation. And the last point is error management. Is if I have an error during my mutation, I can by the same solution using set query data roll back to my initial state. So here again, I can roll back for this particular query. I can set the data to the previous data. So it's very straightforward. You just have to work with queries key and data, and you can easily set your query data by this way for optimistic update or when you have to roll back to a previous value, for example. So this is basically how complex is to manage mutation and cache validation and optimistic update. I think that at the end is not so complex. You have a very good control of what is going on, and you can do exactly what you want in terms of cache validation and what data you want to update when a mutation occurs. Now, how to use React Suspense and Error Boundaries with React Query. So first of all, React Query supports both React Suspense and Error Boundaries. But how to use these features in your code? So actually, our movies list is using Suspense, and it keeps our component code very lean because we don't have to manage loading indicator here or error management. It's all done in the movies list screen where we use Suspense on the top of the movies list. And thanks to the React Query support, we don't have to add any additional code. So we just have to fall back to a loading screen. So let's use a slow connection here and reload my app. So we have the time to see the loading indicator. And here you can see the loading indicator, and the list will be displayed just after. So it's great. I think for 80% of the cases, Suspense it's a very good combination with React Query, and the same for error boundary. React Query provides a query error reset boundary provider that you can use to manage error boundary, and you can just fall back to an error message when React Query error occurs, for example, a GraphQL error or something like that, a network error. So you can display a nice generic screen, and you can use a button to reset the query state. So it's, again, maybe for most of the cases, it can be very nice. But if you need more control, for example, in the movie detail screen, we have this two-step display where we want to display first the data from the list, and then we want to load the details. So we need to have something more precise. Maybe it's doable with Suspense, but to keep the code and the component very simple, we have just eject from Suspense for this movie details component. So how to eject? You just have to set the corresponding property in the React Query hook, and here I just set Suspense to false, but I still want to use error boundary, so you can mix exactly what you want here. And now in my movie details code, I can display a loading indicator according to the state or to the data I want. So it's great, to have the possibility to define the behavior you want, or to have the choice to use Suspense or not according to your need for each screen. Flatlist with infinite queries. So let's see how it works with React Query and React Native. So now my application supports infinite list in the movie screen. So when I scroll down, after 30 items, I will fetch a new page from my GraphQL API. So here you can see the terminal that query automatically fetch the next page. So how it works? So I have this use infinite movies custom hook that will return a fetch next page function. This fetch next page is called by the onReach function handler, and this handler is used in this Flatlist property. So when the end is reached, it will automatically call this function, and this function will, if I go back here, this function we call fetch next page, and this is a function of query, and query will fetch the next page according to the settings defined in this custom hook. So here we don't use a hook generated by GraphQL CodeGen, because there is no infinite hooks generated automatically by GraphQL CodeGen and query plugin. So we do have to implement our own function. So we use infinite query function from query, and we just have to call the GraphQL client to use the GraphQL client to do the GraphQL request, and this function will accept the page number, and according to that we have to define the new variables like the offset, and the limit is the page size. So in this case, because we are using an offset for the pagination, it's very easy to configure and to calculate what is the next offset for the next page. And here you have also to implement this get next page param option with a function that will return the next page number. So this is how to manage infinite query in query. So first you have to do your query with the page param you receive, and you have to expose a function to return the next page param, and that's it. And yes, sorry, you still have to return the data, and the data is all the movies from all the pages. So you have to return the pages that are in the current state, and to add your new movies here. So by this way, your movies list will contain all the movies. And it's great because now I can just have this infinite pagination, and I can, when I do a mutation, you can see that it will refetch automatically all the pages, which is good and not good, because in terms of performance, maybe you want only to refetch the impacted pages. So this is something we will discuss just after. But here it's a good default. I mean, if you do some mutation, you want to have your list fresh when you go back to the list. So query will handle that for you. You don't have to take care of that. You just have to invalidate your query. And if your query is using pages, no problem. It will refetch all the pages. In your infinite list, you may want also to support optimistic updates. So in our case, when I click on the rating here, I want to have automatically my UI updated here. So to do that, I have to update my mutation to, in addition of doing an optimistic update from my movie details, I have added this set movies query data function that will optimistically update my list of movies. So to update my list, I'm using query set query data, and I have to update the list. And to do that, I have to get the previous data and to update the corresponding item in my list. So this is a movie I've just updated. I want to update the movie that has to be impacted. So this is the way to go. The solution, I think, is nice when you really need to have an optimistic update on all the screens impacted by a mutation. So we don't use that a lot because the query invalidation are working very nicely, and we don't have an offline support mode very advanced, so we don't have to do that. But again, if you want to optimistically update the list in addition of the current screen, this is also something that you can do with RecQuery and thanks to the setQueryData function. And now the last but not the least feature I would like to discuss with you today is the cache persistence in the Async storage. This is great when you want to store all the cache data into the Async storage. So when your users are going back to your app, you will have all of this data already populated in your screens. So it's a very snappy UX. And it's also very nice when you want to implement offline mode support. So to activate this feature, you have to use some new experimental RecQuery features. So in the app component, we call this function, and this function will init persistor, it's a custom function, will use the new persist query client function and the new create async storage persistor. So it's very straightforward. This persist query client just receive a query client, a persistor, and a value to know when the persist query client has to bust the cache. So here we want to clean the cache when the application version has changed. So we are sure that we won't reuse data that can have changed according to a new API change or about new changes in our components. So we want to bust the cache when the app version has changed. And that's it. This is actually what you have to do to persist your queries cache data into the Async storage. Is simple as is. So you can imagine how simple now is to persist all of your queries cache by using this very simple function here. So it's a great feature. Hopefully it will be an official and stable feature. Right now we have decided to use this feature in production, and so far so good, and we are so happy and so excited to use it, because again, it's a maybe 10 lines of code just to manage this great feature. As you can see, RecQuery is a great solution, especially in terms of developer experience and features, with very good defaults. But how it compares to other popular libraries? I think all of the solutions I show you now are great. You can create very nice and sophisticated application with all of these solutions. So it's really a question about the philosophy and the strategy you have in your React Native app development, and also about the skills of your team and what you want to do. So I think there are two categories right now. There is the universal data fetching and caching approach, and the GraphQL state management frameworks approach. So RecQuery is on the first category. It's something very universal. You just have to think about queries, cache, optimistic updates. You don't have to think about the schema and how your GraphQL API schema is defined. It's just queries and just invalidate queries with variables. And so it's something very straightforward. And it's also you have a total control on how your cache will be invalidated and when. So this is something which can be really good for some team because you have this very easy learning curve, but you can have very precise configuration and for sophisticated cases. In this category, you have also SWC, often used with Next.js, and Redux Toolkit, which is something more integrated with Redux if you like this approach. So React Query in this category is really great. And you have also to have in consideration the community, the maintainer, and all the resources around, like the GraphQL CodeGen plugin. So for me, it's my better library, is my preference choice in this category. On the other hand, you have the state management frameworks with Relay, Apollo Client, and Urkel. I think Relay, it's the oldest one. It's very mature, but it's opinionated about the schema. So it can be a show blocker in some situation where you want to do what you want about the schema and you don't want to have some requirements about the schema you have created. But if you respect the rules about Relay, you have a really great solution because you have all the documentation, all the features, you just have to follow the rules of this framework and you will have great results. Apollo Client is really nice. I'm used to use a lot of Apollo Client on other projects and even in the first version of our React Native app. Is very nice. Again, if you like the framework approach and have very good features that relies on your GraphQL schema, is nice. It also relies on a normalized cache. I mean, it will, when you do a mutation, it will automatically knows which data to update in other queries. So it's nice, but there are a lot of edge cases. And again, there is maybe a kind of learning curve when you want to use all the possibilities of this great Apollo Client framework. Urkel, it's something a little bit newer compared to Apollo Client and Relay, but it's very nice because it provides both document and normalized cache approaches. So I think it's great. Maybe this is the one I prefer in this category, very close to Apollo Client. So again, just have a look at the documentation, the repo, a real life application example, and just decide first the approach you want. Is it a universal one, or you want maybe something more optimized about your GraphQL schema? And the last one is GQLS. So it's very, very interesting one because you don't have to create your query before. You just have to code and to use your query, and it will automatically generate your GraphQL query. So it's brand new. It's very interesting. Maybe if you want to go very fast and don't bother with creating your GraphQL queries and mutation elsewhere, just use your query and it will automatically generate your GraphQL queries. So I think it's a great new solution, and we are very lucky because the GraphQL ecosystem now is so good with very good solutions that we can just decide which flavor we prefer. So it's a question of taste and team and how you want to manage your React Native project with GraphQL. It's time now to share with you the lessons we have learned during our journey with React Query. So first, start your project with GraphQL Code Generator. It's a game changer in terms of developer experience and productivity. It's so fast, so don't waste your time by adding types and hooks. Just use the GraphQL CodeGen with the React Query plugin. It's so fast, and the VS Code extension is really nice. Use custom hooks as possible to keep your React components logic clean, even if the use query, use mutation are very easy to use. It's good to have this kind of abstraction so you can keep your React components really clean. When possible, just use and have a single source of truth for your queries data. So you can use the initial data property when it's relevant. So it's great because your components just fetch some data, and this data can be set by initial data or by an optimistic update or by a GraphQL API, but it will be the same source of truth. So try to have only a single source of truth when it comes with your data. Always test with the network conditioner, because if not, often your connection is very fast and you don't see exactly what is going on. So if you want to test loading screen errors and just how the optimistic updates behaves, just use the network conditioner as possible when you evaluate your feature and your application. It's very easy, as you have seen just before, to log everything is happening in your cache and your queries. So just monitor, and especially at the beginning, to understand really how React query is working and when the data is fetching. So it's a great solution to learn and to debug. There is a enable option in use query, and we use this a lot to manage dependent and conditional queries. So again, it's a great solution. And if you use React query, have a look at this option, and you will see a lot of use cases when you may need to use this enable option. And about Suspense, yes, Suspense, you know, in terms of productivity is great because it means less code in your components. But in some situations, you may need to have more control about the loading state or the error management. So at one point, you can be limited with Suspense. And so this is not a problem because React query supports a lot of status variables you can use to check very precisely what is the status of your query. What's coming next for us? So we will work with React query for full offline support. So right now we have some limited offline support features, and but I think React query will provide all the features we need to have this full offline support. And the other point is GraphQL subscription supports. So right now it's possible, but it's not very well documented in the current website. So you have to investigate a little bit. There is a very nice article by Dominic about using WebSockets with React query, a discussion in the repo, but we would like to see more details and more examples and best practices about using GraphQL subscriptions with React query. So again, I was quite excited and happy to speak at React Native Europe conference, and I hope that this talk will be useful and with a lot of recipes and code example. And I wish you a great conference and with very interesting talks. Thank you.